Today we've got another unexpected art interview because I finally figured out what I want to call these. Only took two interviews. So, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, sure. Okay. So my name is Rob Truszkowski. I am an artist and I live here on Treaty 4 in Regina. And I am an instructor, a professor at the University of Regina, and I've been here for 18 years. I teach printmaking and a few other little things, but printmaking is my passion. I live in Regina. I live in Cathedral. I'm the chair of the Cathedral Village Arts Festival, which is coming up on its 35th year. I have three offspring of various ages and a partner who is an artist and a public servant. And yeah, I'm happy to be here today.
I am happy to have you here. How did you get into art? How did you get into printmaking?
Well, they're related questions, but they're different questions. How did I get into art? I don't know. I think I always just really liked, like most kids, I think, who get into art eventually, I like drawing. I used to draw a lot and color a lot when I was a kid. I'm pretty methodical and I like to kind of think through processes and all that sort of stuff, but I'm also creative. I can just say this because it's just the truth of my life. First time I ever thought I might be an artist was when I had an older cousin who was really cool, who did a lot of art, who I thought of as an artist. But I mean, I was 8 and she was probably 12. And she bought me a sketchbook for Christmas one year. And I was young and I just started thinking, oh, wow, this is what artists do. You know, you make drawings in sketchbooks. So fast forward, I did well in high school and I liked all of my subjects, but I had the most fun in art class and I had a wonderful art teacher. And she made this suggestion at some point, well, you know, if you're thinking about going to university, you may want to go to university for art. And it hadn't really occurred to me until I was in, 11th grade or something, that was a thing that I could do. And I went off to university at Queen's University in Ontario. And it was an amazing program. We had a wonderful experience. It was a cohort of students that went through the BFA program all together. So I got to know my classmates and my teachers really well. And one day I was in a printmaking module. Kind of the course system is a little different there, but I started my printmaking module the way most students did. And my mind was blown. And I have several of these sorts of origin story moments, but when I saw something that I'd never seen before. That was printmaking, and it kept happening because I kept seeing more exciting and interesting things being shown to me, and I didn't know they existed before that time, and it really blew my mind. And I had a fever for printmaking. I needed to know how to do it all so that I could do stuff with it. And that was 29 years ago, probably. Maybe a little bit less than that. Maybe 25 years ago or something, at the point I was in my undergrad where I started to see print. It's been with me for a long time.
I've noticed that usually what gets people started on a creative journey, it's never a single moment. It's just a bunch of things that just kind of stack on top of each other.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I think it's probably like that with, a lot of things that people like to do. But, they're not all going to be positive experiences, I think. But I think if you have these experiences that activate your brain in some way, maybe you become stubborn and you want to figure out a problem, or maybe you're a masochist and you just like a bit of a beating that you take with printmaking or ceramics or any other process that is kind of new, but there's always this kind of light on the horizon. And so, yeah, you kind of, for me at least, I know I just kind of constantly sought these next moments, these next experiences, learning these next things. And so they do stack up. And at some point you go, oh gosh, I love this. I'm in love with this. And I've been doing it now for a little while. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, life is short. Why not choose the most complicated way to make a living? Why not make your life more difficult? I'm an indie author who also does podcasting and radio shows. So it's sometimes you just got to choose the difficult path and figure it out as you go.
I think it's exciting honestly, I couldn't imagine a life where I just did the exact same thing every single day until I got to retire. I say that with a lot of recognition of the privilege that I have. I can say that because I have this amazing job at the university that lets me be an artist. But even here, I'm rarely doing one thing. I'm always doing 10 things. And that is the life of an artist, in my opinion. You cobble it all together, which sounds a little bit, quaint perhaps, or maybe it doesn't sound quite as predictable in terms of a life. But once you get your rhythm as an artist, I think whatever that happens to be, you put it all together so that you can divert your attention and your creativity and your love and your care and all that sort of thing to different things. And I think for me at least, it nourishes me to have all of these different outlets. So yeah, it's not an easy path, but it's quite imagined a different path, honestly.
I definitely feel that. Someone made a comment about, if it weren't for like money and recognition, if you weren't going to get either of those, what work would you still be doing? And I'm like, I'd still be writing. I'd still be getting to learn people's stories. I would still do that because I'm already still doing that and I'm not getting money and recognition.
Right, absolutely. I have a bunch of friends who I went to university with, and I'm still close with all of them. And most of them are in businessy related things. Some are in law or they're in tech and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of money to be made there. I'm not as young as I used to be, but I used to be young. And even then, my friends would talk about how they lived for their vacation time, which I do get. I do get that, and they started talking in their 30s about what retirement was going to look like. And to me, I was like, first of all, as an academic and as an artist, you tend to get started a little bit later, but I was like, I can't imagine not being an artist anymore. Like maybe I could do with a few less meetings at the university and that sort of thing, but like the idea of retiring from being an artist, I don't know too many artists that retire. They just kind of like get to devote more of their time to that one kind of element of their life. So
yeah, it never goes away. You just pivot. Start pursuing different mediums or different ways to express for different reasons, but it's not something you really give up because it's part of you.
Yeah, absolutely. It is part of you. I mean, I think it takes all artists some time to figure this out, but that like who you are as a person can't really be separated from who you are as an artist. Like you can go to university, you can go to school, whatever, wherever you happen to go. You can take classes at the community level, or you talk about high school and you have assignments. But at some point you realize that even if you have assignments, you are knitting who you are as a human being and as an artist into those assignments, and they're not separate anymore. You don't think of what your art is as a thing that you put down and then you go away. I mean, everybody needs a bit of time to relax, lay on the couch, look at the ceiling, let your eyes go unfocused, get on the beach, go in a pool, whatever it is that you need to do. But I think artists are always aware of who they are while those things are going on. So yeah, no, I'm in agreement with you.
Exactly. I'm kind of curious, going back, what is it that drew you to printmaking specifically? What was that journey like for you?
I kind of alluded to it already there with when I started out as an undergrad in maybe my second year. I was in the printmaking module. It was a mono printing module, which for non-printmakers, what it really means, it's kind of like a combination of painting and printmaking. So you're using some of the equipment, printing presses and printing plates and that sort of a thing, but it's much more organic. There's much more kind of painting with ink, and it's not really about reproduction per se, or reproducing or exactly reproducing a particular thing. It kind of blends those disciplines. And anyways, I was in this module, and aside from the fact, and my students will tell you, and they laugh at me as I talk about this all the time, I love the smells of the printmaking studio. Actually, I love all the smells of the art studio. I think I remember walking into the print studio and going, oh, what are these wonderful, delicious smells? Now, some of them were solvents, which were affecting my brain, but a lot of them were just like printing inks and paper and damp felt and all of this sort of stuff, the kind of things that you might see in a print studio and smell in a print studio. And I just remember going, oh, it's not so foreign, because there's like these blobs of color that look like paint, and it's on the top floor of the art building, Ontario Hall at Queen's. So it's not so far from where my painting studio was, but it's also a little bit different. And so in terms of that, it was exciting. Like that was my first introduction really, other than a little taste in high school, which I didn't really remember, but it was in this module, and we were shown like some photo transfer methods, stuff that honestly, stuff I'd never even thought of. I was 18 years old, I come out of high school. I had no idea that this stuff existed. And I was like, whoa, that is so incredible. In like 1996, we weren't learning Photoshop in high school, and I had a camera and I took photographs, but I never really saw that as being anywhere related to like being an artist or what I wanted to do as an artist. Being an artist was like being a painter. Largely, you could draw things really well, and that was what the feeling was. And this was just something really different. So that was like that first kind of like little experience that caught my attention. And then a little later on in that module, in that semester, a different instructor came in just for like one day. His name was Otis, and he happened to be the printmaking professor who was married to the painting and printmaking professor, Jan. He came in and he did this demonstration, which we must have all just looked like deer in the headlights. We had no idea what was going on. But basically, he introduced lithography to us. Now, I won't bore you, although it's very exciting to talk about lithography. I won't bore you about it. But essentially what he did was he had a piece of paper, a photocopied sheet of paper with an image on it or something like that, and he like poured some goop onto it, and then he took a sponge and he put some water onto it, and he wiped this goop, which is called gum arabic, onto the piece of paper. And then he had a little roller, which I'd never really paid much attention to before, and he rolled some of the ink that we were using for other things onto this paper, and the ink only stuck where the image was, and wherever the paper was just paper, there was no ink. And then we could take that kind of like a stamp and stamp it onto the things we were working on. My mind just went like, what did I just see? And I mean, I say the rest is history. There have been a series of these sorts of events, but this was one of these moments where I was like, I need to try this, like right now. We need to be done this demo, and you profs and everybody else has to leave me alone so that I can play with this stuff and see if I can figure it out. I've got a copy card. I'm going to run down to the copy machine and photocopy pictures and some things out of books or whatever, and I'm going to see if I can do it. And ultimately it was, like any good printmaking professor, he made it look way easier than it was. It was really hard, and things didn't work necessarily super well for me, but it was just enough where I was like, whoa, I need to know more. And I knew this in the moment. That's the thing. You can like look back in hindsight on experiences you have and go, oh, that was an important moment when that happened, when I met this person. But like, I knew it at the time. Like, I could taste it. My brain was just buzzing. And so that's really where I think by the time I was halfway through this module in my second year as an undergrad, I was like, I need to know more. And so here's a fun fact. I named my son Otis after my printmaking professor, Otis.
Oh, that's cute.
Because I worked with him for the next 2 years as a major in printmaking, and I'm going to see Otis and Jan, his wife, both now retired from Queens. They're coming to a talk that I'm giving about prints, and we keep in touch. So, I mean, like, once you become really invested in the community that is printmaking, it's a small world, it's a big world, it's all of those sorts of things, but you definitely have a community beyond, your studio basement in Regina, for instance, Anyways, I've digressed there slightly, but yeah, I'm jazzed about printmaking, and I'm happy to talk about it all day long.
When you said like, oh, I won't bore you with explaining lithography, I'm like, but that sounds interesting.
Oh yeah.
An unexpected art lesson is all about everything you didn't know about art. I've had the least education between Watson and I. Watson studied. I have just absorbed information from hanging out with Watson and being around creative people. So you mentioned lithography. I'm like, I'd be curious to know a little bit more about that. And it's fun hearing it from someone who's so excited about it.
Right. Absolutely. Do you want to know more about lithography? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, so I teach printmaking, which is a whole bunch of different things, but they're kind of broken down into 4 categories, more or less. There is screen printing, which is a thing that most people have heard of. Maybe not everyone knows about it, but most people have heard of, and it's probably the most accessible in terms of being able to do it DIY. You can buy kits for it at Michael's. You can go to YouTube and learn all about it. I tend to take screen printing on the road when I do workshops and that sort of thing. And, screen printing is more or less how you get any sort of image or text usually onto like a t-shirt. That's the most basic.
My uncle had one of those in his garage for a while, a screen printing setup that he used to print shirts for my cousin's sports teams.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's the most, I think, probably the most salt of the earth, in the sense that it gets out there. Now, as artists, we borrow the technology or use the technology that you would use to put a big 6 on the back of a soccer jersey, but we do other things with it. But so screen printing is one of the things. Etching is another thing, which is using little pieces of metal, usually copper, with drawings scratched into them or etched into them with acid, and then that has ink put onto it and then squished against paper under a printing press, and then you pull it at the other side and you have your image on your paper. And That's usually, actually, to be honest, the first process that I introduce when I'm introducing printmaking at the U of R, because it seems a little foreign, but it's also not super high stakes, and students can kind of like get into it. And if you're a drawer or a photographer or whatever, there's ways for you to access
So
access
it's
printmaking.
similar to, we talked about ukiyo-e, the Japanese block printing.
Yeah, it's
printing.
related in a sense, although Japanese block printing or lino block printing that you might have tried in high school, which I actually do here at the U of R as well, is relief printing. So ink sits on top of the surface, whether it's a block of wood or a piece of lino, linoleum, or some other process or other material as well. So you've got screen printing, you've got etching, which is ink below the surface. You've got relief printing, which is ink on top of the surface. And then you have lithography, which is like the most freaky of the processes, because it is ink that sits kind of on the surface, but not really above it too much and not really below it too much. I guess it's the only printmaking process that was ever really invented where we know when it happened. In about 1798, a guy named Sennefelder in Germany figured out that he could control the fact that water don't get along. If you've ever seen an oil stain in a garage or on a street and then it rains and you see the water kind of push away from it, if you've ever had oil on your hands and you go to wash it and you see the water beat up as opposed to soak into your skin, you know that water and grease don't get along. And Sennefelder discovered that he could control that process. And really what that ultimately means is he used big slabs of stone, big thick slabs of limestone, which were quarried very close to where he lived in Bavaria in Germany. He realized that if he used a kind of greasy material to make drawings, writing, text, actual drawings, whatever, on these stones, and then treated it with a series of chemicals that he had, he could ensure that the water would soak into the stone, except for where he had drawn, and that would reject the water. And then he could roll a greasy, inky material over top of those areas, and it would stick only to the areas he wanted it to. And this was like Gutenberg and movable type in the 1400s, and this is kind of like the internet. Like, it really dramatically changed the world. And he wrote an amazing book about chemical printing, and it's called On Lithography. But essentially, he changed the world with this process because now the writer or the artist's hand could be seen in anything that was printed and sent out into the world. Prior to that, you had to have specialty, you had to be able to like carve metal a certain way, and there was no authenticity to the kind of marks that were being made by an artist or by a publisher, by someone who was publishing musical notation. This was a big thing. If you've spent all day long carving 1/8 notes, 16th notes, quarter notes into a sheet of metal that's going to be then printed in hundreds of copies to be sent out into the world so that orchestras can play, and you add the 16th note and not 2/8 notes, or not, you needed an 8th note, not 2 16th notes, it's really not easy to uncarve metal and fix it.
That makes me stressed out just thinking about that. Also with how much you have to fit and make it. Yeah, I did band from like middle school, high school, all the way through college. So
my son's a violinist, and so I know how intensely packed with information those sheets can be. Mm-hmm. And so there was money to be made in music publishing at this time, and Sennefelder capitalized on that and set in motion this incredible revolution in terms of printing that took the world by storm. And here's an additional fun fact for you. Okay, well, I guess there's two. Oh my God, I've got 10. One is that something like 90% of every printed image, whether you look at it and go, oh, this is actually a photo or not, or it's a textbook, or it's on the side of a bus shelter, 90% have been printed using lithography, because lithography, the speed and the volume that was eventually achieved with the lithographic process. So even the finest art magazines and books with these incredible lush photographic images that you would need a really, really, really strong magnifying glass to look at to find those little tiny dots way down there, it's all printed by lithography. No longer on slabs of stone and no longer with two guys rolling a rolling pin of ink, but lithography nonetheless. That's one of the fun facts. But here's the other one that is just like absolutely, in my mind, mind-blowing. Sennefelder lithography discovered what he called chemical printing because, and in his own words, the way you might take a pencil and like write something on a desk. I don't know if kids do that anymore, but I certainly did when I was in high school. When I was in school, you write down like a thing right on the desk because you don't have paper. He wrote down a laundry list using some like greasy goop that he just happened to have in his workshop on his work surface. And his work surface was made out of limestone because limestone was abundant. And he grew up and lived just a few miles from Solenhofen, this huge granite quarry. This was a material that was just around everywhere, and he spilt something on it. And that's when he realized, oh, the water is soaking into the work surface, but not where I've just written on it with this kind of greasy material. You know, he got that light bulb moment around how grease and water don't get along. But here's the thing that is absolutely mind-blowing. This became such a huge industry around the world, and limestone exists on almost all continents. But the most perfect and the most suitable limestone, the limestone that does not have inclusions in it, the limestone that absorbs in a way that is reliable and repeatable. Honest to God, it comes from his part of the world. It comes from the Solenhofen quarry, which is still in use to this day.
That's so cool.
The universe just like aligned for this to happen, where maybe if he was in Mexico and he was using some Mexican limestone, he might have come across that same idea. But the fact that because this became such a huge industry that people were quarrying limestone from everywhere in order to try to make it work in their part of the world, and ultimately they ended up, if you wanted the best quality limestone for lithography, you shipped it from Solenhofen, Germany. So to me, that's just this like incredible confluence of things coming together, and it really did change the world. And the third fun fact is that the University of Regina has dozens of lithographic stones that I teach my students on, and almost all of them are from Solenhofen Quarry in Bavaria in Germany.
That's so cool.
Right, exactly.
And this is exactly why I like asking people about their special interests, because it's fascinating.
Or at least I'm trying to convince you it's fascinating because I'm all jazzed up about it. But I do agree with you. Absolutely.
I personally find it fascinating. Hopefully our listeners will too, considering they've been listening to our show and we go into deep dives on all sorts of niche subjects. I'm also curious to know about some of the work that you've done, how your craft and practice has changed over time, if there's any specific messages or imagery you like to focus on. Like, how do you personally art?
That's a huge question, and it's a huge question when you're a younger emerging artist, because you're trying to figure out how to talk about what you do and to have it sound somewhat reasonable and not to like toot your own horn too much and all that sort of thing. And then by extension, it becomes difficult when you've been an artist for a long time, because I know that I can track certain things through my work. But if you haven't figured it out already, I like to talk a lot. And there's like so much that has been connected to my earliest days as an artist. And then there's so much that has evolved. So a number of years ago, I was sitting in my studio at the U of R here, and I was talking to the curator of the Dunlop at the time. And it was a kind of it was an interviewee portion. And he said, so your work is really text-based, and you must, you're a text-based artist, so blah, blah, blah. And then he made a kind of a claim, whatever. And I was like taken aback, because I had never described myself as a text-based artist. I'd never really thought about it that way. There are a lot of themes that run through my work. And this was post-grad school. So, I mean, like I had deep dived into who I was as an artist and made the work about it and talked about it and wrote about it and so on. But I was like, oh, text-based artist. And then I was like, oh my goodness, everything I've been doing since I was text became part of my work. So one of the things you would see in my work that runs through it for the last 25 years or more is that I use words. I use words or sentences. I love language. I love communication. And despite my suggestion there that I do like to talk, which I do, a kind of assumption that talking is about communication, the whole point of my my MFA thesis was that communication's impossible, and we don't really know. We really can't. Like, how can we possibly understand one another? I mean, it's a mind experiments, because I'm doing my best to try to explain to you why what I am saying is not possible for you to understand. But as a kind of a theoretical position, I can't come to terms with how communication works. So anyways, I love the idea of communication. I don't think it's possible, but I guess it is. I love language. I love learning languages. I like coding and decoding imagery. Humor has always bubbled throughout my work. Sometimes it's a little more hidden. Sometimes it's really explicit. I was born and raised in the 90s East Coast, West Coast hip hop battle era. So like I love rap music and I love language. I love poetry in all of its forms, but music, popular music in particular, has always been really interesting to me. I'm really highly subjected to earworm phenomenon where you hear a thing and you just like you can't get like I will not sleep at night because I just have a line running through my head, or I'm in that kind of period where I'm just about to wake up and my brain is just buzzing over and over again. I mean, gosh, there's all these sorts of kind of conceptual things that run through my work. But I would say that really the same with a lot of other artists is that like the thing I'm doing right now is the most interesting thing I've ever done in my life, and it's much more interesting than the thing that I just finished, and certainly more interesting than the stuff I did before.
Stay tuned for part 2 of my unexpected interview with Rob Truszkowski.
If you like what we're doing, you can follow us on social media and join the conversation over at An Unexpected Art Lesson on Threads, Blue Sky, and Substack. And you can also support us over on Patreon, get early access to episodes and other fun things at patreon.com/anunexpectedartlesson.